And now for our guests. Joining us, Mr. Don DeBar, activist and commentator from New York. And Daniel Kovalik, author and activist, joining us out of Pennsylvania, both from the States. Gentlemen, good to check in with both of you. Good to see you both are doing well. And I guess we'll start there in New York with you, Don. Good to check in with you. We have over the years developed a number of schools of thoughts on what happened on September 11th and why, from the obvious to what people call conspiracy theories, to sometimes a concoction of a few different narratives that either complement or are consequential narratives. How do you see events of that day?
Well, it's kind of pointless to argue over things that cannot be known. Who did what? We can investigate, as thoroughly as we can, and we're going to know what we know and not know what we don't know. And of course, what we think we know might actually be the product of some deception or whatever. I think that what is most important is what was done with it in the aftermath, and also what forces would have caused such a thing to happen in the first place. In other words, what historical activity would lead people to want to kill in the financial center of New York in a big, display, in essence, as happened on September 11th. Certainly, the people who make policy in the United States have shown on a global stage for decades that they are capable of anything, that they will murder tens of thousands of people for profit or power, or just to make an example of them. We've seen it from Vietnam to Congo to Libya to Syria to Iraq, Afghanistan, Laos, Cambodia. We could go on and on. The aftermath here, however, was a declaration of war on that part of Asia and sort of paving the way for the latest adventure of the Israeli state to completely cleanse Palestine of Palestinians and declare war on the neighbors, looking just at what happened in Qatar in the last 2 days. There's a path that goes from one place to the other. The list that the general, whatever the hell his name was, with Clinton had of the 7 countries they intended to invade back in the 1990s, Clark. They've done each one of these things pretty much out in the open with impunity. And yet here we are. I think that we need to figure out a plan to put an end to this already, because I think time is very short, not just for the people in Gaza and in the region there, but for the planet, because this is going somewhere very badly, and it seems like it's going there very soon.
Thank you there, Don. And Daniel, welcome to the program. Thanks for your patience. And Daniel, you see why I have to ask how you digest the events of that day, because it's just hard to make assumptions these days. And if one of either of you were a conspiracy theorist, I would have to that would impact our conversation, obviously. But for the sake of this program, let's assume neither of you are. But if you are, Daniel, to speak up now. But anyway, the U.S. post-attack. Let's start our conversation post September 11th attacks. The U.S. decides it wants to target al-Qaeda, who it sees responsible for events of that day. We know how that played out. We know that as soon as they went into Afghanistan, U.S. forces, Pakistani intel told them, hey, al-Qaeda has just fled Afghanistan. They're coming into our neck of the woods, including Osama bin Laden. But the U.S. went ahead and stayed there for another 20 years, took the fight to the Taliban instead. Help us make sense of that.
Yeah, well, you can't make sense of much of what the U.S. did in response to 9/11, if 9/11 was the product of what the U.S. claims, which, and let's assume it is. The U.S. claims al-Qaeda was behind it. According to the 9/11 Commission, it appears that Saudi Arabia, which of course is the font of Wahhabism, which created al-Qaeda, apparently Saudi Arabia had some involvement in it. And ultimately, what does the U.S. do? at first, yeah, it went after al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but much broader, as you mentioned. It goes after the entire nation, even though the Taliban offered to give up bin Laden if the U.S. could show proof that he was involved, which the U.S. did not. And as Noam Chomsky has pointed out, the FBI never listed the World Trade Center destruction on bin Laden's, most wanted designation, because they never had enough evidence, But let's, again, assume it was bin Laden, al-Qaeda. What eventually happens, and this is all recorded in a great article by Seymour Hersh in 2007, he says by 2005, the U.S. completely did a 180 and went from opposing al-Qaeda to using al-Qaeda and similar forces to go after countries in the region that it wanted to regime change in, like Libya, for example, and Lebanon and Syria. And of course, what happened in Syria? Al-Qaeda is now in charge of Syria, and the U.S. backed al-Qaeda in Syria. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's true. And now al-Qaeda is in charge, and the U.S. recognizes that government. So if you believe the U.S. that al-Qaeda was behind 9/11, you cannot make any sense in what they did. And by the way, they decapitated all these governments that opposed al-Qaeda, like Saddam Hussein, like Gaddafi in Libya. Went after Iran, even though Iran helped in the war on terror and is a mortal enemy of groups like al-Qaeda. Yeah, and then in Afghanistan, they spent 20 years only to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. I mean, this was a disaster. And at the beginning of your program, it was said hundreds of thousands of people died in these post-9/11 operations. Actually, according to Brown University, over 4 million people were killed in West Asia. I mean, so it was just an unmitigated atrocity, really.
Thank you, Daniel. And Don, we sit back now, we take a look at post-September 11th till present day, over 24 years all throughout the world, not just Iraq, not just Afghanistan, but you look at the insurgency backed onslaught inside of Syria over 10 years. You look at the Saudi-backed war against Yemen, the disruption to Iraq's stability by the U.S., which allowed for the emergence of Daesh terrorists and for them to flourish for a couple of years there. This all the impact, the security that was impacted, I mentioned the Saudi war in Yemen, the persecution of Muslims in Burma, in India, the Gaza genocide. It seems like everything that ensued, the entire the process of Western, how would you put it, the devaluation of the Muslim life led to so much policy and so many things that are related to September 11th without directly being related. Do you understand what I'm saying? They fall under the penumbra of a trajectory in which the world went post-September 11th, are impacted by that very day, aren't they?
Yeah. For example, there's a judgment, a multi-billion-dollar judgment against Iran that was taken in the federal court in the Southern District of New York, claiming that Iran had some remote culpability in what happened on September 11th, and not a single lawsuit brought against the Saudis. Saudi Arabia, the home of 16 of the 19 people supposedly involved or something. Saudi, senior government officials being ferried out of the country that day. Bin Laden's relatives, friends with the then President Bush's family, and yet they sued Iran, and they got a default judgment against Iran executed against a $500 million building in Manhattan, for example. It's outrageous, the disconnection from reality that the narratives here allow, and people's heads should be exploding from cognitive dissonance every day here in this country, and that's not happening. And most people don't even understand or realize that there's a problem. We're looking at a situation right now where this war that was started with Russia in Ukraine back in 2014 is now, coming close to a shooting war with NATO. Certainly, there are people trying to engineer that to happen, and this is at the same time that people invite into Qatar folks from that are supposed to be negotiating some sort of an agreement between Hamas and Israel, and they basically set them up to be blown up by the U.S. military. It was only some good fortune on the part of a few people that they ended up not in the building, and bad fortune of the people who ended up there. You can't trust ordinary channels of diplomacy. And by the way, these same people want to get Putin and Xi in a room together to meet with Trump. You can't use diplomacy, and you have a war being engineered between NATO and Russia, and all of this happening in the region where you are. I'm aghast. I can't comprehend it. It looks to me like the beginning of another world war on the scale of the last two.
Thanks, sir, Don. And Daniel, I want to talk about some of the domestic stuff in the States. Bush signs the Patriot Act in late October of 2001, legislation which aimed to strengthen the federal authorities' counterterrorism response. Now, this expansive bill, and I'm reading this verbatim, includes provisions to bolster cooperation between law enforcement and intelligence agencies, to strengthen banking regulations, to combat terrorist financing, create new definitions and penalties for terrorist activity, put an asterisk next to that, and dramatically expand domestic surveillance. Critics allege law is too broad and was rushed through too quickly. Press reports later revealed massive collection of Americans' phone records by the NSA, you very well remember, based on Patriot Act authorities, which prompted Congress to place new limits on domestic surveillance. Many say the Patriot Act, they see it as a monumental blow to constitutional freedoms. How do you see it? I remember we were all fired up post September 11th, and we welcomed anything that would make America safer, and I was in LA at the time, and more secure. But I'm not sure that took place in the last 24. We gave up a lot of constitutional liberties, but what did we get back?
Well, yes, and I never welcomed it, to be honest. I mean, I smelled a rat. I saw they were exploiting this tragedy to undermine the U.S. Constitution. Was it Ben Franklin who said, those who sacrifice freedom from security don't deserve either, right? Something to that effect. We lost a lot of freedoms. We lost our privacy, as Snowden would go on to show. There's just a huge surveillance state that grew out of that. They've used anti-terror laws not against terrorists, but against people who dissent against U.S. foreign policy, which, by the way, many times support terrorists, I've already mentioned, right? Supporting, the U.S. has supported Al-Qaeda and ISIS and other groups. But again, goes after people who support Palestine, for example, who want friendly relations with Russia or Iran or Cuba. They're the ones considered the terrorists. So it was a great perversion. Again, both the U.S. foreign policy and U.S. domestic policy were completely perverted after 9/11. Again, whatever the truth is about who caused 9/11, what we know is the U.S. government welcomed it and was happy it happened. In fact, Cheney said before 9/11, we need another Pearl Harbor, to be able to do what the government ended up doing. So that is very clear.
And I'm glad that Daniel mentioned that, Don, because you know what they're using some of those curbs on personal liberties as a result of post-September 11th legislation. They're using terrorism laws to go after pro-Palestine protesters on U.S. college campuses. And so this is right to Daniel's point about the government using post-9/11 legislation to basically overreach and invade people's privacy.
Listen, I had a friend who was a criminal defense lawyer here in New York. She passed a few years back now. And she represented a man that they referred to as the blind sheik, who was convicted of participating in an attempt to blow up the World Trade Center that supposedly took place in the early 1990s. She represented him in prison, handling his affairs, dealing with the state and such. She had been doing that for a few years before September 11th and before what they refer to euphemistically here as the Patriot Act, I would say, sarcastically. About a month or two after this legislation was passed, John Ashcroft was on Letterman or Carson or one of those programs at night and announced that she was being indicted for giving, aid to terrorists. Long story short, she ended up screwing around with the courts for 3 years and ended up in prison from 2006, 2007 for 4.5 or 5 years, a couple of months before she ended up dying of cancer. This was a woman who gave her life to defending poor people and working people from the excesses of the state, particularly in New York City. And she was sacrificed on the altar of this ridiculous hate campaign that was directed to enable the wars that have been conducted in that part of the world. And I only know about her personally because I knew her personally. I'm sure there are thousands of people in the U.S. and in Europe and other places that are removed from that area who faced similar problems because the whole point of this legislation was to curb any dissent that could actually impact policy.
And when we talk about the effects and the impacts still evident today in West Asia, Daniel, and I'll put the last thoughts to you. We look about the way the U.S. Imposed itself on the region post 9/11. The couple of wars and the other ones that it proxied itself in and out of from time to time, and we realized that without those taking place, there'd be a good chance that Israel will not be as bold and as reckless in its adventurism as it is today. That's why I'm saying everything is tied together when it comes to post 9/11.
Oh yeah, no, 9/11 was a boon for Israel. As you say, they've exploited it too in order to try to build greater Israel, which they're doing right now. And we see that they're expanding into Lebanon. They have expanded into Syria. They just bombed Qatar with the support of the United States. They have taken over the border area with Egypt, which they are not entitled to under the peace agreement they signed in the 1970s. They have exploited this too. The U.S. and Israel have exploited this for their own geopolitical interests, and it's shameful. And I think most Americans know that. I think most Americans by now view 9/11 very differently and distrust their government quite a bit as a consequence of how the U.S. handled it. But now as a populace, we're weaker now to be able to resist it because of all the power the government amassed after 9/11.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. Time has gotten the better of us. I really want to get into the establishment of the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, the TSA, Guantanamo, but time has gotten the better of us. I want to thank you both for joining us. Don DeBar there joining us out of New York, and also Daniel Kovalik joining us from Pennsylvania. Viewers, this brings us to the conclusion of your Press TV Spotlight program. Thank you for tuning in, and bye-bye for now.